Hey guys, yeah, welcome to this live stream where I'm here to talk about, give you my thoughts on last night's season 3 premiere of Vice TV's Dark Side of the Ring. In case you guys don't know what Dark Side of the Ring is, it is a 1 hour, well, recently for premieres in the past two seasons, season 2 and last night, 2 hours, and sometimes the same with the season finales. But Dark Side of the Ring basically takes a look at the behind the scenes situations in wrestling that, even though, through shoot interviews and even through various other promotions, they might touch upon, they don't really go fully in depth. Like, in other words, a company like, let's say, WWE or Impact Wrestling, TNA, if you will, or someone doing a shoot interview or whatever the case may be. And I do apologize if there's any lag. But anyway, so most times they won't even touch, they won't even go near subjects. Like I said, they'll touch upon them, but they won't fully go in depth. And that's the one thing about Dark Side of the Ring that I've actually enjoyed, is the fact that they not only go further than anybody else would, but they actually are able to get in contact with those that maybe previously had been talked to, about this, about similar, if not the same situations that Dark Side of the Ring is going to talk about, but they are able to get more information out of them, more in depth, behind the scenes, you know, like I said, information behind the scenes tidbits, if you will. They're, like I said, a normal, a normal like documentary on somebody or on a certain subject, from the point of view of, let's say, WWE or somebody else, they would kind of touch upon, but they wouldn't fully go in depth about. And I know I repeated myself there, so I do apologize. But that's basically what Dark Side of the Ring does. They go to these links. They go beyond, what WWE would cover in a similar situation. They would go beyond what Impact Wrestling would cover. They would go beyond potentially what AEW would cover. They go and they talk about things that, like I said, are somewhat taboo, if you will, in the wrestling business, but not necessarily, because I'll give credit what credit is due. Like, with WWE, obviously they see the success that Dark Side of the Ring is having. They're like, okay, maybe we could do something similar to that, and they do it, and they've kind of been doing it with what they call icons. But they end up talking about stars that they potentially have a feeling that Dark Side of the Ring won't talk about because of who they are, and how the true association with certain companies, like with WWE when they did an Icons episode on Yokozuna. They know in a sense that Dark Side of the Ring won't touch that because you know um, the Anari, the Wani family. Easy for me to say. I do apologize, but the Yokozuna's family, the Samoan family, Roman Reigns family, if you will, is tightly connected to WWE. So they don't want to probably end up with any kind of lawsuits or anything like that, talking to people about certain things. I mean, they talked about Superfly Jimmy Snuka because, in the eyes of WWE, Snuka did nothing wrong. So what did Dark Side of the Ring do? They said, that ain't gonna fly. We know the case has been reopened or was reopened. We're gonna get to the bottom of this. We're gonna find out some information, or we're gonna, not only find out information, but we're also gonna, showcase that information. We're gonna talk about that story because no one else wants to. And now you got WWE. Oh, so yeah, now you got WWE doing the Icon series in response, but you also have them now working with A&E on the biography series because basically, like I said, these are stories and superstars and stuff that they believe Dark Side of the Ring, Vice TV will not touch. But Vice but Vice, got to give them credit. They will surprise them sometimes. They will surprise them by going in that direction and saying, "Yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about, maybe the same thing you've talked about, but we're going to go more in depth about it. We're going to, get more information than what you're letting on and all that. So, to me, I definitely got to give, the thumbs up to the people behind Dark Side of the Ring on Vice, that they're willing to go that route. They're willing to take that chance because nobody else wants to. Nobody else wants to um, take that chance and talk about things that, even though they could be touched upon in other various wrestling documentaries like WWE, Impact, AEW, whatever. These guys over at Vice are like, no, we're gonna take it a step further. We're gonna go a little further than that. Um, we're going to open up the floodgates. We're going to open up, as Tony Khan calls it, the forbidden doors, and we're going to find out more about certain events and certain wrestlers, alive or past, that nobody else is letting you in on. We're going to find out more information. And once again, Dark Side of the Ring, got to give them credit. With the season premiere last night on Brian Pillman, they hit it out of the park. Which to me, I thought was just great. It was just tremendous that they were able to do that, because because here's the thing: WWE years ago, in fact, I have it. Released a 2-disc DVD on Brian Pillman, the loose cannon, the Brian Pillman story. Excuse me. And even though they did go in depth about certain things with Brian and all that, they didn't fully go in depth like Dark Side of the Ring did last night. They didn't. They went further than that. They went beyond what WWE did. Yeah, WWE touched upon some things that Vice touched upon as well. But like I said, Vice took it to another level. They found out things, they talked about things, they touched upon things that WWE would not touch upon. Like, first of all, number one thing is that because of his because of the fact that Brian always had this raspberry voice most of his career. It was due to the fact that it was because of 40 surgeries he had on his throat. And one emergency surgery he had to have, took place on the dining room table of the doctor that he goes to get this looked at. So they had to do a triography or something like that. I can't think of the name. I do apologize about that. But they had to basically rush him to the doctor's house because the doctor didn't live that far away, at the doctor's behest, to the ambulance, to bring Brian and his family over to his house so he could do the emergency surgery right then and there, on the dining room table, which is just crazy when you think about it. It's just really, really crazy when you think about it. But yeah, they get into that, and here's the thing. WWE didn't get into that. They didn't. I remember watching the DVD when I first got it, and they never touched upon that. Like I said, they touched upon some things here and there. They touched upon his accident and all that, but they didn't go any further. They didn't go in depth to what what was really going on behind the scenes with Pillman. They didn't. They did not go in depth. They basically were like, here's the things we're going to highlight about. Here's the things we're going to talk about, and that's it. They didn't go any further. They didn't go any further than, here's what we're going to talk about, and that's it. They didn't go any further. And and at first I'm just satisfied that we got something on Pillman. At least they're talking about him. But I think, just like a lot of people that got that DVD or saw that DVD, a lot of us kind of felt like there was something missing. Like there was something more but we weren't sure of exactly what it was. And Dark Side of the Ring, they capitalized on a lot of the issues, a lot of the things that WWE didn't touch upon, and they said, "Okay, you don't want to talk about these things. We're going to talk about them," because I think the guys behind Dark Side of the Ring kind of felt the same way we did. Like something was amiss. Like something just didn't make sense. It's like to them when they watched the Brian Pillman documentary, like that WWE, excuse me, the WWE put out, you know, to them, even though it was a good documentary, like a lot of us later on afterwards, they felt like something was missing. And over the years, more information started to kind of leak out or come out that there was more to the story than just what WWE was showing you. So the people behind Dark Side of the Ring said, "Okay, there's more to this. We're gonna take that step. We're gonna be the ones that basically, talk about not just what WWE talked about, but we're gonna go beyond that." And like I said, that's what they did here because, like I said, everybody's talked about how many number of surgeries Brian had on his throat. And here we basically got an accurate number from his sister, his own sister, Linda Pillman, I think. And I think it was Linda. I think that's her name. And she said it was 40 of them. And she even talked about how when the mom came home, she found Brian breathing, not not breathing correctly, if you will. It's like something was very wrong. She called the doctor, put the phone, kind of stretched the phone out because it was still one of those, because it was still at the time when the phones were like this on the wall with the line. So she took the phone, from her ear, pointed it in the direction where her son was breathing, and the doctor said, "You get him over here right now. You get him over right here, right now. I'll call the ambulance." And "Oh, you get him over here right now. I'll call the ambulance," basically to get him over here. And that's what happened because the doctor lived, right down, that not that far from him. So, like I said, the doctor's like, "Bring him over here and we'll take care of it in my house. We'll give him the emergency surgery he needs on his throat right here on my dining room table." And that's what happened. So, yeah, they went into that, which, WWE did not do. And then what was really surprising, and it's obviously no secret that when you're on the road, man or woman, as a professional wrestler, sports entertainer, that you're tempted to go behind your loved one's back. You are very much tempted to do that, which is why I guess nowadays, if you're both in the sport, companies like WWE and AEW and Impact are making sure that you're both within the company working together, and so something like this can be avoided. But anyway, though, what was interesting, and again, WWE didn't touch upon this. They didn't. They did not touch upon this. And it's the fact that Brian Pillman, we know about Brian Pillman Jr. We know about him. You see him on AEW as part of the Varsity Blondes. I think he's doing great. He's going to be a future champion there in no time flat. But what was interesting is you find out, that, yeah, Brian had children. Brian Pillman had kids. He had 2 daughters, 1 son. But what WWE didn't touch upon, and Dark Side of the Ring, got to give them credit again, that they touched upon, they were able to find out, is that Brian had kids from 3 separate women. 3 separate women. It was all due to his scheduling and being on the road and stuff like that. He had children from 3 different women. One named Danny. That's D-I. That's D-I. Not Danny, but yeah, Danny. But it's spelled D-A-N-I. Danielle. It's Danielle Pillman, but Danny for short. So it's D-A-N-I. She's the oldest. Then you had Brittany Pillman, and then you had Brian Pillman Jr. Kind of, very identical, if you will, with me, except I had two, except me and my sisters, we were all born and raised by the same parents. No craziness, outside, no craziness there. Thank God, thank the Lord. But here it's like he had two daughters and one son, all birthed by three different women. And we didn't see who the mother of Danny was, Danielle. We didn't see that. We did see pictures and video, I think, of Rochelle. That was the first wife of Pillman's, who was the mother of Brittany Pillman. And right off the bat, we find out that she had issues. She had some issues. I'm guessing, from what I could tell, she had mental issues and I think some substance issues at times. She basically dealt with depression in a big way. And Pillman being on the road as long as he was, didn't really help with that, whatsoever. And then because he was on the road, he met his other wife. Um, I think her name's Melina or Michelle. I think. Let me check. Let me check you. Hold on. Let me check here. Um, let me check. Should have personal life. Here we go. Melina. Melina. So yeah, Melina was the second wife and the one that, you know, when you if you go, and they showed this. I'll give the one thing Dark Side of the Ring does, and I guess they do get permission, or they find a way to. Well, even if they don't get permission, they find a creative way to show the footage, and they show the footage of Pillman at home, with his 9mm. It's that Pillman's got a gun deal, and Austin's trying to break into the house. That's when we first see Melina Pillman. And I can tell you this honestly, what she's gone through mentally and physically, after Brian's passing, and maybe even before that, let's just say it's a total night and day. It's a total night and day, honestly, with her, because she doesn't even look like she did, back in 1997. I mean, I know, 20 years have passed and things, people change. 20 years have passed, people change, but she definitely doesn't. I mean, but honestly, she does not look the same whatsoever. And they do go into detail that after Brian's passing, she went through a stage. She went through a stage of alcohol abuse, depression. You know, they even mentioned that Brian Jr. found her on the floor at 12 years old. Not dead, because she wouldn't have been here for the interview, but basically passed out from drinking, I think, vodka or something like that. Too much alcohol, basically. And yeah, just obviously with Melina, it took a toll on her, both physically and mentally. And you can kind of tell she's dealing like with issues, like physically, like she has jitters at times or something. And like her speech, it's all right, but it's kind of I would say kind of not what it used to be. It's kind of like more along the lines of she can't. I mean, she could speak. She could speak all right and everything, but you can kind of tell that the abuse and everything is kind of physically and mentally kind of taking its toll on her. And to say that basically the daughters are forgiving, not forgiving um, of Melina would be an understatement. They are not forgiving of her. Here's the thing. The reason, yeah, I do apologize if there's any issues here. I do apologize. But like I said, the reason they are basically unapologetic to her right now is the fact that they blame her for a lot of crap going down in their lives. They do. They blame her for a lot of crap going down in their lives. And, honestly, after what you see here, you can't really blame them. You really can't because, you know, and I'll give Melina credit. At least she's matured enough that after everything she's gone through, she's, physically and mentally, that's kind of woken her up a little bit. That now she's, that she's realizing she shouldn't have done or said the things that she did. Because Brittany, from what I can tell, partially blames Melina for her mom's death. She does. She blames her for her mom's death. And Danny, along with Brittany, blame her for the fact that after their father passed, they never saw a penny out of anything that was owed to them because, they're his kids, but, they never saw anything, they never saw anything, financially coming their way, um, like any, royalties or alimony, whatever you want to call it. They never saw nothing. And they blamed her for that. The only person that has been willing to reconcile with her and bring her back into their lives is Brian Jr. He basically has come to the point that he's realized that he can go on hating her for what she's become and what she's done, or he could basically grow up and forgive her for the mistakes that she made and try to reconcile with her and reconnect with her, to try to make things better and hopefully, from what I can tell, be that first step in maybe Brittany and Danny doing the same thing. But from what I can tell, just by watching this, that's not going to be easy. That's not going to be easy for Brittany. That's not going to be easy, not Brittany, but it's not going to be easy for Brian Jr. to try outside of wrestling because he is wrestling as well. But obviously, when he has time off, and with wrestling the way it is right now, that's a luxury he has. That he's he's probably going to be if not currently is working on trying to get this family to reconcile, with his sisters, that is his stepsisters, to reconcile with Melina, or Melanie, if you will. Yeah, Melanie, that's what it is. Because they can't keep hating her for the rest of their lives. They can't be doing that. I mean, Brittany herself, I think, during the interview, called Melina the devil. She called her the devil. That she's evil. She says she's evil. She's the devil, and that right now, she's reaping what she's sown, and that she even says that she's going to be one. She said something along the lines of she's going to be 100 years old, and she's going to be alone. Now, if she lives to be 100 years old, she's going to be living alone. Nobody's going to want to be around her. So obviously, you could tell that maybe out of the two daughters, the one that has the most animosity, the most bitterness and hatred and disdain for Melanie is Brittany. And the reason for this is due to the fact that what they talk about in the special, and again, this is something that WWE never touched upon, but during the special, during the premiere, one of the things they touched upon that WWE, as far as I know, never did in their interpretation that they released years ago, is Rochelle was just driving up to where Pillman and Melina lived and where the kids were. And I think this was at a time where Pillman was able to get like visitation rights. In other words, he was able to have, it was something along the lines of visitation or partial custody or something like that. Basically, he was able to spend time with his daughters and everything. But it got to a point that I guess from him and Melanie's point of view that they had to take the kids in. They had to get full custody because they didn't trust what was going on with Rochelle. Like, mentally, she, like, physically maybe she could take care of them, but mentally it's like, she wasn't, you know, you know, um, ready for that, or good, mentally she wasn't, up to do that, if you will. So what happened is that, and this is why Brittany obviously has a lot of disdain, if you will, for Rochelle, and everything. Not Rochelle, but for Melanie. This is why Brittany has a lot of disdain for her, because as she recalls, she's riding her little trike bike, those little plastic trike bikes, in the yard, and her mom drives up. Now, obviously, according to an order, her mom wasn't supposed to be around. Wasn't like supposed to be, visiting her or something like that because of, her mentalness and her drug abuse or something like that. And Brittany was just, she sees this car drive up and her mom gets out of it, and she's just happy to see her mom. And, she's hugging her. She's happy to see her. And this obviously gets the attention of Brian and Melanie. Now, we're not sure exactly, how it got their attention. I think what they kind of alluded to is Brian or Melanie, if not both, saw Rochelle out there holding Brittany. And the first thought process, and again, it could have been Melanie, I think, if not both. The first thought process was Rochelle was going to kidnap Brittany and take her away. And so they came rushing out. They grab her. They get into an argument, and they basically start filing for full-time custody. So after this, well, basically they get into an argument. Brian takes Brittany out of Rochelle's arms. They blame her, accuse her of trying to probably kidnap her, and then they decide to file for full-time custody. In other words, basically Brittany Brittany and lives full time with the parent, with Melanie and Brian Jr. and her step siblings, because Melanie had about 3 kids prior to this. So basically, Brian. So basically, there was 5 kids in the house, and then Danny, when she comes over to be with her father, is included in that. So you're looking like at 6 kids overall. But anyway, long story short, basically they decided to start filing for full custody and restrainment on Rochelle. Rochelle wants to gets on the phone to try to talk to Pillman. He's to Brian, if you will. He's not there, but Melanie, picks up the phone. She's the one that answers, and she basically says something that obviously here, when they talk to her in the premiere, she regrets saying, because she realizes, now, if not has been realizing since 97, that maybe, or 96, or whenever what I'm about to talk about happened, she realizes that maybe she shouldn't have did what she did, because basically she gets on the phone, with Rochelle, and basically tells Rochelle, you're, she tells her that you're a terrible mom and that your own mother thinks I'd be a better mom than you. And then she hangs up on her, according to the dramatization that we saw, to visually show us, that happening. This, of course, distraughts Rochelle even further into the depression and, the depressional problems, mental problems that she has, that basically Linda Pillman talks about how Rochelle called up her mom and said, basically that she was going to end it. She was going to end her life, And the visual dramatization showed the person portraying Rochelle having a gun in her hand, and that immediately after she hung up the phone, that's when she, took her life, or basically shot herself. And Linda was contacted about it, and unfortunately, when Linda got to the hospital, it was too late because they told her that Rochelle had passed, you know, on the helicopter ride, um, or the airlift ride, if you will, to the hospital. And this is why, Brittany has so much disdain and bitterness, if not hatred, for Melanie, because despite the fact that, Melanie brings up the fact that both her and Brian were distraught, mostly Brian was distraught and everything, and they both kind of acknowledged that maybe they may have pushed, if not indeed pushed, Rochelle to do this. Um, despite her kind of, admitting it here publicly in front of the world, you know, Brittany and Brittany basically, I should say, still obviously, and you could just tell by the tone in her voice, she does not she does not care at all about what happens to Melanie in the future. I mean, obviously, she could rectify with her, or reconcile with her, I should say, in the future. But right now, you could just tell by this interview, and maybe a lot has changed since the interview, but I don't know yet. But obviously, she basically holds, like I said, holds a lot of resentment, hatred, and bitterness. And it's not just for what happened to her mom, but it's also later on what happened to her father. So she holds a lot of bitterness and everything, and only all she can really do is give it to God. When all I could say for Brittany Pillman is this: whether you believe anything that Melanie Pillman said in the interview during the premiere last night, all Brittany has to do, honestly, is give it to God. She has to get on her knees, ask God to give her the strength to forgive this woman for what she's done, and try to reconcile with her like her stepbrother has done, because that is his biological mother. But if I'm Brittany, I'm trying to basically get on my. I want to get on my knees and ask ask the Lord above to give me the strength to try to forgive this woman, and try to, you know, try to move on from what happened, try to reconcile, and try to make a better future for the family as a whole. But yeah, they went into that. Like I said, that WWE didn't do. They even go into graphic detail. They don't show it, but they go into graphic detail about Pillman's accident. The Humvee and everything. They go into the fact that he had to have metal plates, titanium plates, put into his face. That they had to peel down the skin of his face. They literally had to pull his face down to get in there to put the plates in, and do the surgery. They had to put the bolts in his legs. They even said that his leg, like this leg here, was just falling off. It was getting ready to pop off, and the nurse had to go in there and put it back onto the bed, and they had to fuse that to where it was mainly like in a walking position and all and everything. And again, WWE, they never, as far as I know, they never went into this kind of detail whatsoever. They never went into this. They never went into this kind of graphic detail, if you will. They never did. It was just like one of those situations. It's like one of those situations to where you think that when they released, the DVD, that they could have put like a parental guidance warning on it, or an MA warning, but they didn't do that. And if I believe, honestly, if WWE would have did that, they could have gone, and gone and talk about most of what Dark Side of the Ring talked about, because honestly, if they would have put an MA rating on that, then Dark Side of the Ring wouldn't have had to worry about talking about it. Be right back. Yeah, it was just junk mail. All right, let me go. That's going to give me time to go look at the Rite Aid too. I might stop at Rite Aid and see what they got for the girls. Okay. You should. Hello? Sorry about that. I just got a phone call from my mom. They let her out early, her and the teachers out early, because they're setting up for CPR over at their site. So they just let them out early. She also believes it has to do with something else, but I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, like I said, what was I? Oh yeah, they go into graphic detail, like how the fact that they had to peel down the skin to get the titanium bolts in there, or the plates, and that the leg was hanging off the bed, to the nurse had to put it up, and they had to fuse it into a walking position. I mean, again, they went into very graphic detail that, like I was trying to say before the phone rang there, that had WWE put an MA rating on this DVD that they did on Pillman, then I think they would have done all this. And in my personal opinion, Dark Side of the Ring wouldn't have had to worry about really going too much into detail about Brian Pillman. As a matter of fact, they wouldn't have had to go through it whatsoever, because WWE would have beaten them to the punch had they done that. But they didn't. They decided to kind of give us the diet version, the light version of what was happening and all that. Dark Side of the Ring, though, they didn't pull no punches. They said, "Yeah, we're going to go all out with this. We're gonna show you guys exactly, or talk to you guys exactly about the other things that nobody wants you to know about." I mean, they interviewed, like I said, they didn't just interview Melina Pillman, his last wife before he passed, but his kids. They interviewed his former training coach, one of his former training coaches in the Bengals. You know, they've interviewed Dave Meltzer, who Brian was a close confidant and contact of Brian's, and all that. So they talked to Jim Ross, they talked to Eric Bischoff, you know, and I'll give and one thing I'll give JR and Eric a lot of credit for when they get talked to, and you could tell the difference between when they would talk about Pillman on the WWE set and compared to Dark Side of the Ring, is they're able to go into more detail. It's almost like WWE doesn't want them to say certain things, about Pillman and what happened behind the scenes and all that, they, they tell him, they probably give him bullet points of, well, okay, answer, when we ask you these questions, answer it like this, just don't go into full detail. And you could tell that. You could tell that big difference between the two. And of course, the big catch that they got was Stone Cold. They got Stone Cold, and he basically talked about some things that he had talked about on the DVD, but he also talked about other things that they didn't talk about either. Like he would try to for a bit talk to Melanie, on and off after the passing to see how she was doing. Um, they talked about how he was in WCW around 92, 93, and then that's how the Hollywood Blondes came about. I think honestly they may have had things mixed up. Maybe Austin forgot, but I thought it was around the mid 90s to 93. So I would say about the mid 90s in about the mid to late 92, I should say mid to late 92 into 93. But yeah, they talked about that. And Steve, talked about when they want to drive, he'd be, they'd be driving together because they were a team. Pillman would be looking at the dictionary to improve his vocabulary for promos, and as well as he also came up with the idea of, gold chains and the Hollywood Blondes name, and on all that, and that basically that was all Pillman's idea. He even talked about how this all came about, and I think he did talk about it in the DVD as well. But he talked about how Pillman just came up to him one day and said, when they were arriving when they were both at center stage, and said, "Hey man, we got to come up with a finish," And Steve's like, "Well, what are you talking about?" He says, "Well, a tag team. And Pillman's like, "Well, we're a tag team now." And he's like, "Huh?" He's like, because Steve was so used to being a singles guy, and around this time, they were positioning him for a run at the U.S. title, but I think because they didn't have much for him to do until that point, they decided to basically reel him back and put him into a tag team with Brian, and as they say, the rest is history. So they went into that, and of course they went into how Brian basically did something that, as far as we know, nobody else has done yet or has dared to repeat, and that's basically make make everybody believe what you're doing is legit. Not just the fans, not just the insiders, but the boys and the girls, the men and the women in the back that you work with. Make them believe what you're doing is legit. And of course, that's the loose cannon deal. Because when Brian came in, as a lot of us know, he was a pretty boy. He was a pretty boy out of Stampede, wrestling, or got to start in Stampede Wrestling after a stint, I should say, in the NFL and the CFL. So he got to start in Stampede Wrestling after training at the Stu Hart dungeon. They actually had footage of Stu Hart putting Brian into a submission that I think his his coach, his defensive coach, or his training coach, if you will, out of Cincinnati at that time, said that, hey, if you could survive 4 or 5 hours in that, then you're good to go. Or somebody, I think it was him, or it was Jim Ross, somebody said it, or Dave Meltzer maybe, said if you could survive 4 or 5 hours in that, you're good to go. So they talked about, Stampede, and obviously being in Stampede and seeing what Brian could do, got the attention of WCW, got the attention, I believe it was Jim Ross or somebody got well, actually it was Dave Meltzer, because he was in contact with Dave Meltzer at that time. So it got the contact, so through the contacting of Dave Meltzer, it got the attention of Jim Ross in WCW, and they brought him in, and they showed, like, one of his first big matches was against Rick, and how Rick saw a lot of potential in him, wanted to work with him. And they just went into all detail about his run WCW, how, like I said, he went from being Flying Brian, which I do remember because just a little bit of quick trivia here, a little quick note, I should say. When I was watching WCW and it was still part of the NWA, or at least in its later years, and they introduced, I should say, the light heavyweight championship, I always associated that championship with Brian Pillman. Brian holding that belt was the first exposure I knew about the light heavyweight title. And I don't know what it was, but anytime I watched WCW when I could, back when that championship was around, I always looked forward to seeing Brian defend that title. That was just me. And maybe it's because he shared the same name as I did. I don't know, but I just liked it. I really did. I just gravitated to that championship when he had it. When he had it. And, I would get upset at times when he would lose it to Jushin Thunder Liger or somebody else, but hopefully he would get it back, and he did. But it was because of Pillman that I knew about the light heavyweight championship, and I gravitated to, anytime that was on television being defended or just being shown or being brought to the ring by Pillman. Anyway, they go into basically how he went from all this, the Hollywood Blonde and all that, and evolving into the loose cannon. Now, of course, they did touch upon a lot of things that were going on, like I said, outside of the ring. Like I said, with the suicide with Rochelle committing the suicide that she did, and how he felt responsible and everything, and that going back to work, a lot more was weighing on his mind, and he had to deal with that as well as having to still provide for his family. So again, it was through all this going back and forth of how he involved into the loose cannon and how what was happening outside was affecting him as well. Then of course they get to the part where he basically gets his release from from WCW courtesy of Eric Bischoff, and the training coach for the Bengals that he was good friends with basically was like, he was basically the one that suggested Brian Pillman do this. He was the one that suggested he blur the line. He basically says that he's the one that suggested it, that Pillman blur the line between reality and fiction. And this is one thing about this coach that really I think might annoy some people when they see this, or if they have seen it, is when he would just when he would be asked something about the contractual situation that Pillman was putting himself in, he would be like, "Oh, what do you think? It was money. Money was all. It's always been about that. It's always been about." He would get real loud, like he wanted to get the point across that what Pillman was doing as the loose cannon, basically working everybody, from the fans to those in the business, that was just about getting money, making money, and that the idea of doing this was to help him provide, give a better life, if you will, to his kids, to his family, if he could basically get a better contract out of the situation, depending on who he was going to go with. Now, of course, the one thing they did allude to that I think the WWE documentary kind of alluded to, but didn't really that much, was he wanted to stay in WCW. He felt he was going to be guaranteed good money there, and that basically he was WCW bound. Or he was WCW bred, so he'd rather be there. Like that was his home base, and that's what he'd always be associated with until the Humvee accident. And then that's basically where he ended up signing with WWE, WWF, because of that. Because he was guaranteed not only did he sign the first guaranteed contract, that is, or the first wrestler to do so, but it also had it in the contract that he could renegotiate or could he's going to get something more out of it after the expiration is up. And Bischoff, he even brought this up in the interview, and he brought it up somewhat in the documentary WWE did. He basically had the impression that, okay, Pillman's going to do this, and eventually he's going to come back. Now, I don't know if that was still in the cards and before what happened, but yeah, Pillman had signed with WWE, and it looked like perhaps from what some people from those that they were talking to last night in the premiere, it almost sounded like Pillman was going to be a lifer for WWF. Like he was not going to go back. Like even though WCW was where he made a name for himself and everything, that because of what happened to him, his value would have not been as good, and maybe he wouldn't be in the position he would hope to be in, like he was promised he'd be in. And so obviously from what they were describing last night, he was probably bound to be, WWE for life after signing that guaranteed contract, because it has all the, caveats that he was hoping for, if not more. And he signed this at a time where he was still working on it, where he was still dealing with his injury. He had multiple surgeries coming up, so one big surgery was his ankle coming up, so they had to find a way to get him off television, or at least work it into the storyline to where he could remain on television, but he physically wasn't going to be doing anything. And then that's, of course, when they show the infamous Pillmanization, as they call it, or Pillmanizing, as they keyed the word from there, of his ankle by Stone Cold. On a 1996 edition of Superstars, they basically showed what Stone Cold had done. And this was done to write him off so he can get his surgery. And then, of course, that led to the infamous, as I mentioned earlier, Pillman's Got a Gun, a situation that, WWE had to apologize for on their weekend morning show, Livewire. And they showed footage of that. They showed Vince McMahon apologizing for what happened on that Raw with Pillman, having the gun, the home invasion, and all that. He had to apologize because USA was pissed. USA was pissed at WWE for doing that. They were pissed off at them for doing that. And Vince, and this again, this is at a time when WWE was still PG. This was where they were borderlining that PG TV-14, border. Like they were borderlining. They were on the edge. Like they still referred to themselves as a family product, but they were slowly tipping over inside and going to the side of more edgy adult content. But this again was still at a time where something like what Pillman and Austin did was very taboo and was not meant to be seen on television, especially with a family show. So, basically, Vince, had to apologize. He had to apologize for the incident because it was like, even though it was, meant to pop a rating, it was like something that, nobody had seen before. And no one had attempted. Not even WCW had attempted that. Not even ECW had attempted that. I mean, ECW had its controversial moments, there's no doubt. But even they didn't pull something like that. And speaking of ECW, they did bring up the fact that Pillman showed up at CyberSlam, in '96 at ECW. And Meltzer brought up the fact that the reason this happened is because WCW and ECW were at odds with each other in a big, big way. There was, disdain, if you will, that it would be that basically what I'm trying to say, the last thing they would expect is for a WCW guy to show up in their arena and then basically shoot, if you will, on Eric Bischoff, on WCW, basically have free range, unlike he's been able to have before. And they go into everything that he did during his little stint with ECW, and that basically this led to him now being in a situation where, okay, WCW wants to bring him back because now his name value is skyrocketing, but WWE now he also has the attention of WWE, if not more so, because of the fact that he showed up at a convention in Las Vegas in '96, got the attention of Jim Ross and Vince McMahon, mostly Vince. That's what that very notable picture of Vince and Pillman come from. And according to Jim Ross, Vince is like, we can't hire this guy. This guy's crazy. He's nuts. And JR has to basically reel Vince in and be like, well, yeah, that's his thing. That's his thing. Basically, he tells Vince that that's what Pillman's plan. That's Pillman's whole deal is right now. His gimmick is he's blurring the lines. He basically told Vince that Pillman had alluded to him that he was blurring the lines. He wanted people to think what he was doing was legit. His craziness, his loose cannonness was legit in and out of the ring. I mean, they even showed um, the Clash of the Champions episode. Will Pillman, in the beginning stages of the loose cannon deal, went after Bobby Heenan, and Bobby Heenan dropped the freaking F-bomb. And that now Pillman's got people talking because he got one of the most notable personalities in wrestling, manager and commentator wise, to basically, swear on TV, basically drop a freaking F-bomb because he wasn't sure what was going on because, he didn't know, like anybody else, that what was happening was, Pillman was working people. He was working everybody from the fans, like I said, from the fans to his fellow wrestlers. So, and all that. So nobody knew exactly what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on. Now, when they got to the later parts as well, they talked about, how Pillman wanted to get back in the ring, and he would take pills after pill. He would take pills to relax the pain. If that one pill didn't work, he would take another. He would basically take a variety of pills, pain pills, to make the pain go away, so he could get back in the ring and compete again. And they showed him having his match with Goldust at SummerSlam, as well as at In Your House and all that. So they showed that he was still competing. He even showed him having his match with Austin on Raw, but he was competing in a way that, if you saw him walking through the airport and all that, you could tell something was not right because he was barely able to stand, according to those that they talked to. He was barely able to stand. And sorry, my finger hit the mic there. And according to what JR said, he got contacted by a lot of other stars telling him, hey, he can't stand, he can't even make it through the airport, you need to do something about this. And even Austin chimed in on this as well. So JR basically felt that he had to do the one thing that he knew would probably put him on the outs with Pillman, and that is he had to get a drug test on him. And fortunately, all they found on Brian was his painkillers. That's it, nothing else. But Brian felt betrayed. And obviously, you could tell in the premiere that JR felt very sorry about that. Like, that's the last thing he wanted to do. So, yeah, Pillman felt like he was betrayed by JR because JR was basically forced to make this drug thing happen. And later on, not later on, but what am I trying to say? Yeah, later on, of course, like I said, they talked about how he was still competing and everything, but then they get to the part that we all know about. They didn't get to the part that we all know about. And obviously, Jim Cornette, who they talked to as well, who still gets emotional about it because he doesn't want to relive this. He doesn't want to talk about it, but, he knows that it's got to get out there. He knows that, well, it's going to get asked. I might as well, it's going to get asked. I want to be talked about because this is part of it. Might as well get it out there. And, that's what they did because, like I said, after they talked about how Brian felt betrayed by JR, they also talked about how one night Brian was so out of it that he, in the middle of the night, went to his former training coach's house. And his former training coach was like, no, you got to go. You got to leave now. And don't ever come back here in the state. Don't ever come back in the state you are right now. He basically, the training coach was like, I have my kids asleep upstairs. You got to go now. Because obviously Pillman was belligerent. He was not all there. And obviously you could tell, and Austin even brought this up, you could kind of tell something was up. Like, you knew the signs were there that, something bad is going to happen. And unfortunately, that's what occurred. I mean, even Melanie brought up, and this was shown in the sneak peek and of course shown in the premiere. Melanie brought up the fact that Pillman would start talking about, or talking about how he may not be here anymore, that she needs to find somebody else to, so the kids have a father, stuff like that. And she would be like, what are you talking about? Why are you, saying these things? And then, of course, they get to Bad Blood in Your House 1997, which is also known as the site of the first Hell in a Cell match between Michaels and Taker. But that obviously was overshadowed by what happened, prior to that, because, and again, this is where Jim Cornette basically gets emotional, because a little emotional, because he doesn't want to talk about this, but he obviously knows that they're gonna want to, this has got to be brought up. This is going to be talked about anyway. So, obviously, what happened is that, according to Jim, a lot of the men and women are meant to be at the location of the event, live, pay-per-view, whatever, Raw at that time, Superstars. They're meant to be at the show. They're meant to be at the event, basically around 1 o'clock, local time, 1 o'clock local time, so that they can, get themselves ready, go, get themselves ready, get themselves prepared, get something to eat while they're there, as well as, go over what they're going to do. Well, unfortunately, Pillman did not show. Now, they did mention that there are times that superstars, men and women, would show up, a little after 1 because they overslept. They either missed the flight, they either missed, the transportation, whatever that might be. And yeah, because of that, because they missed a flight, because they missed the transportation and all that, sometimes they would call in and say, hey, we're not going to be there. You're going to have to do something. We're not going to be there on time. You have to do something. Or if they do get there, it's a little before showtime, or just maybe an hour or two before showtime, or whatever the case may be. But in this case, when it came to Pillman, he wasn't there. And from what it sounds like, he's always reliant on being there on time, or at least being there around the time he's supposed to be. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. That was not the case, because, 1 o'clock passed, 2 o'clock passed, 3 o'clock, 4, 5. So they get to the 5 o'clock time range where the pay-per-view is about to get ready to go on the air or something like that, and there's no Brian Pillman. Pillman's not shown up yet. So they call the hotel where he was staying at the night before, because I think of a live event. Cornette calls the hotel and is like, okay, where is Brian Pillman at? Where is he at? And they have to tell him, Mr. Cornette, Mr. Pillman's dead. And of course, here's the thing. Just like with the Humvee and all that, they would, like I said, what I'm trying to say is, just like with the Humvee and, and all that, prior, everything prior, I should say, to that, nobody believed exactly, that this could be true. They couldn't believe it, because it was more along the lines of, oh, is this a rib? Because that's what Cornette thought. It's like, is this a rib? And they said, no, Mr. Cornette, he's dead. The police are here. And that's when the reality hit of what happened. The fact that this was not part of the loose cannon deal. This was not part of his work on people. This was legit. And again, this is where he gets emotional a little bit, because he calls somebody over and to get Bruce Pritchard, because Bruce is like the one that has to take care of this stuff. He's like the main guy, like a little above Cornette. And he says, you got to get Bruce. You got to get Bruce. And he says, well, the show's about to start. What's going on? You got to get Bruce. Get Bruce here now. Brian's dead. And I was like, whoa. And again, and put yourself, here's the thing, put yourself in that guy's shoes that Cornette's saying, go get Bruce. The guy that has to really take care of this. Because you're like, whoa. Repeat that again to me, Mr. Cornette. What? Imagine you're put in that situation. But yeah, it turned out to be true. They had to come on before In Your House. They they did show this in the previews or doing parts of the beginning, but not during the show itself. But they showed it. They showed the night before, on Raw and all that. So yeah, it was hard. It was hard, and then again, and then of course they showed a reenactment, a dramatization of the funeral and all that, and how JR and Vince were the only like wrestling personalities that were there. They talked about, how basically, Pillman had passed away from heart disease. And then, of course, they ended up showing the interview that Vince did with Melanie. And Melanie, of course, talked about it, but, she barely wanted to talk about it or even acknowledge it, from what I can tell. And JR and Jim are like, because they were part of WWE at the time, WWF, they didn't like it. They didn't like the fact that you were exploring, that Vince was, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word? Exploring, not exploring, basically was using, I should say, using this interview with Melanie to pop a rating. He was, he was using this interview. Sorry, my thing went off. I don't know why I did that. My screen went blank again. It does that when it goes into silent mode. But anyway, they did not like the fact that Vince was basically using this interview to about with Melanie to pop a rating, exploring, easy for me to say, yeah, exploring the the Pillman tragedy even further. Now, of course, like I mentioned earlier, they got into what happened afterwards. How Melanie, again, you look at the picture, you look at the 20-year difference. Yeah, people do change physically, all that and all that, but she's like, with Melanie, it's like reality hit her like a jackhammer, literally, physically and mentally and all that. And they talk about how, she had alcohol abuse. She was going through a lot. She remarried somebody that became Brian Pillman's stepfather. And this stepfather was abusive to him, to Brittany, to the mother, I think even to Danny when she would be there. That he had attack dogs, basically guard dogs, to make sure that the kids wouldn't be out of line, or if they were grounded, they would stay in the room. He even talks about how the fact that, because they show somebody reenacting Brian Jr. as a kid being grounded in his room, being watched by these dogs that would constantly bark at him and try to gnaw at him and bite him. And he would be sitting on his bed just playing his games. And then Brian would bring up the fact that, somehow his stepdad found out about that, took, his GameCube, because this was at a time when GameCube was around. So obviously about about the early to mid 2000s, he took it and threw it against the wall, basically saying, "Hey, don't you ever play this stuff again?" He was very, very abusive. And my only thought of being abusive is this guy had drug problems himself. He had alcoholic drug problems, because they don't talk about him after that. We don't even see the guy. I mean, he is he obviously is alive, because they do mention in little subtitles that the stepfather was unreachable for comment, because I think honestly, the stepfather knew, he probably heard about this, probably knew that they were going to tell the world what he was about, and he did not want to. He probably didn't know what to say, and that's the thing. That's the one thing I noticed, that anytime, a documentary series, does these kind of things, does these interviews and all that to get more information about certain things, that there will be certain parties that will be unreachable, because I think in a way they know that these people behind these documentaries are going to find out more information that they don't want the world to know about. And this here, believe it or not, was also something the WWE glossed over as well during their release. And again, that's one thing I gave Dark Side of the Ring credit for. They did not gloss over it. They didn't. And I'm thankful for that. Now, one of the bright lights about it is they did highlight how Linda Pillman became like the mother that the girls needed, that Brian Pillman needed, or Brian Jr. needed, and how she would, every day or every weekend, at least as best she could, get them together, to get them back together, reunite them so they wouldn't drift apart, because that's what was happening. They were drifting apart, especially after Pillman's passing. So she would bring them together. She would take the responsibility, bring them together. And they showed a little, they showed footage of that. They filmed footage of that, of them looking through photos and all that. They even, they even had Brian, because when they were interviewing Linda, all of a sudden you hear Brian Pillman Jr.'s voice going like, "Oh my God," because he hates spiders, and Linda's just laughing. She's like, I just cleaned I just had to clean the bathrooms or something. Like, she alluded that she was cleaning. She tried to get spiders out. She wouldn't kill them. She would just get them and put them to the outside, let them back out into the wild and all that. And that Pillman Jr. doesn't like spiders. So that was a little bit of a, lifting off the darkness, if you will. And they did highlight Brian Pillman Jr.'s, career in wrestling, and how, Austin had contacted him about, him having one of his dad's weightlifting belts, and that he wanted to mail it to him. And that kind of was like a sign, for him to get into wrestling. And Brian, Brian Jr., he got emotional. Who wouldn't be? I mean, he shows the picture of, Pillman holding him, his dad, Brian Sr. holding him up, like almost, kissing him on the cheek, almost like he's giving him his blessing, to follow in his footsteps, and that's what he's been doing. And, they got footage from AEW, they got footage from MLW, which, by the way, MLW, I think very soon is going to be on Vice. So that's going to be like a lead in to a Dark Side of the Ring, or it's going to air afterwards. I don't know when. But yeah, they showed that, and they showed, like I said, they showed the fact that Pillman was willing to reconcile with his mom, Melanie, like I said earlier, because he basically believed it's either hate her for the rest of my life, or try to reconcile with her and fix things and go from there. And they showed that she was smiling, she was happy. And again, I think in Brian Jr.'s eyes and his point of view, in my opinion, that this is going to be the first step that's needed to, reunite the entire family as a whole. Because, like I said, Brittany obviously still holds bitterness and disdain to Melanie, somewhat with Danny. Linda, I would assume, kind of has a grudge against her, but not much. I think Linda's more willing to forgive, at least, forgive Melanie for what's happened and try to help her, give her a second chance. Even though there are differences, there are obviously going to be, different thought processing between the two, points of view, points of differences, if you will. Because she even alludes to the fact that when they were at the funeral for Brian Pillman, that there was a camera crew, that Linda and the family, I think before Melanie showed up, was there. And when they showed up there, they were like the first ones there before anybody else. They saw a camera crew, and she was like, well, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. And they said, oh, well, Melanie, the widow, the wife of Pillman, said we could be. And Linda, basically, she takes charge from what she said, took charge. And she says, well, you know what? I'm her sister. You're not welcome. You need to leave. And, surprisingly, they did. So obviously there are differences of opinion, between Linda and Melanie, but obviously she is more willing to, like Brian Jr., to probably forgive her and help her out and try to reconcile and help her out down the line, try to reconnect the family as a whole. But, the same can't be said for Brittany or even, I think, Danny, because, the one thing they brought up, again, like I mentioned, priorly in this video, I should say, is when Brian passed, Melanie was still getting royalties and everything from him, because of him, and that Danny and Brittany did not see a dime. They didn't see a dime out of that. and that because of that, they had to move out of the dad's house, the electricity and the water be taken off, and that it was Linda that came to the rescue, basically, got Brittany the house that she's currently in, and I think Danny went back to live with her original mom, and the rest is history. But like I said, the light at the end of the tunnel was at least Linda is willing to bring the siblings together so they won't drift apart or anything like that, which is a good thing. It's a really good thing. But yeah, overall though, this special, oh, not special, but this premiere for Dark Side of the Ring, I thought did a great job. Did a heck of a lot better than what WWE did with their loose cannon DVD documentary. They touched upon things WWE would kind of allude to, but would then go off in another direction. Here on Dark Side of the Ring, they went all out. They went all out, and I appreciate and respect that. And I cannot wait to see what they got in store for us next week, because next week they go back to an hour, but next week's hour-long episode is on the ultra violence of current GCW World Champion Nick Gage. That's right, Nick Gage, and that was the wind that just blew the blinds closed. But yeah, they're going to talk about Nick Gage, and they're going to interview him. This is where you're also going to see them talking to John Moxley and David Arquette. So it's going to be really, as well as a few other personalities, I'm pretty sure. But it's going to be a really interesting one, because they're going to be focusing on a guy that's currently still wrestling, and he's currently a world champion in Game Changer Wrestling. So it's going to be a really interesting watch next week. And I've made sure to hopefully my mom lets it stay this way. I'm going to be recording every new episode of Dark Side of the Ring. This is a good series. This is a good series, I could say, overall, because, like I say, they talk about stories that no one else will talk about. I mean, what is it like? Next week is Nick Gage. The week after is Collision in Korea. Then they got the Ultimate Warrior coming up. They got the Grizzly Smith family, which is Jake the Snake, Rockin' Robin, Sam Houston. They got Dynamite Kid. And then later on, they got XPW, Chris Kanyon. They got the Plane Ride from Hell. And who knows what else that they have in store. But they've got a lot to come, and I cannot wait for it. And if this premiere on Brian Pillman is any indication of what we have in store for us over the next several months, I think it's going to be worth watching. I think it's going to be worth DVRing if you want to do that. So overall, I'm really just I'm just really glad that we have this kind of a series out there, because we have now people willing to come out and say, look, this is how things are. We're not going to cover any of this up. We're going to tell it like it is and go from there. And if we can't, get in contact with somebody for an interview, even briefly, we'll let you know about it. We're not going to hide it. So I like that. I just overall like the direction they're going with this, and I hope they do more. And obviously, this has been popular and successful enough to where it's inspired Vice to do, and I think the creators behind Dark Side of the Ring, to do Dark Side of Football, which premieres next week after Dark Side of the Ring. So you're going to have two Dark Side series, Dark Side of series, I should say, one on pro wrestling and one on pro football. So it's going to be interesting. So if you're a pro wrestling fan and a pro football fan, there you go. And OTRS Central, I know you like football, just like Daddy, Jeff Siegel. I know you like football. There you go. Got something that maybe you can tune into and enjoy. But overall, in closing, guys, though, I should say, I like this. I like the premiere. I thought they did a great job. They were able to dive into things that WWE didn't dive into with their documentary. They went a step and beyond, in my opinion. And I hope that after this, they get renewed for a fourth season, because with everything they're talking about in this season and everything they've talked about in prior seasons, you can only imagine what other stories are out there that they could talk about for a fourth or maybe fifth season. But really, guys, that's all I'm going to say on my overall thoughts on the Dark Side of the Ring Season 3 premiere. I'm Brian Pillman. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Thank you all for joining me live. Really appreciate it. And I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care. Get vaccinated if you can. But yeah, if you want to check the show out, it's on demand right now. If you haven't seen the premiere, it's on demand right now. And they're going to repeat it tonight as well on Vice. So I would check it out if you're intrigued by that. So till next time, guys, though, God bless. Take care. And I am out. Thank you all for watching. Peace.